You remember Red Maga? Watch.
Trump will win in an 82 million landslide. Not only will Donald Trump win in an 82 million landslide, but if they try and take it from him, if they try and put Biden in, I've spoken to great people in Portland, in Florida, and they say, we're all in, we're done. We will fight, we will join the militia, and we'll fight back. So,
really?
Yeah, America's gearing up for the fight. There's going to be a showdown.
That's what I was always thinking, like, we can't let it happen.
Storm is coming. It's really hot.
All right, that's Red Maga for you guys, and we're going to talk to Joe Conason. He wrote the book, The Longest Con, How Grifters, Swindlers, and Frauds Hijacked American Conservatism. Was there American conservatism? That was one of the questions I want to ask him. But first, Joe, as we were talking about Red Maga, now all of a sudden I got to put the adjective red in front of it because there's now Blue Maga. What's your take on whether Joe Biden can beat the lunatic you describe in your book?
You know, Cenk, I looked at some new polling data today that was put out via Northeastern University, a new study of the polling since the debate, and it doesn't seem that the race has changed all that much, at least according to them. So it's hard to analyze the state of the political contest right now, but could he win? Yeah, sure. I mean, anything can happen. Lots of things could happen to Trump. Trump says insane things every day that don't compare particularly favorably to the stuff that comes out of Biden right now as he's gotten older. So I don't know where we're at. My personal view is that the vice president would probably do better in the general election than the president at this point, but with a new vice president by her side, perhaps. But I can't make a prediction for you that I feel very confident in at this point.
Yeah, okay, we'll come back to that because, look, I like making predictions. I think Biden's a goner. I think he has no chance of winning. I think that if the Democrats had picked two random names, Andy Beshear and Wes Moore as their new team, every Democratic voter would be super energized. Their chances of beating Donald Trump would be infinitely higher, et cetera. But I want to come back to why the Democrats keep losing a little bit later in their interview, because the guys that you describe are swindlers, grifters, the craziest people and the most dishonest people, and yet the Democrats can't beat them. But we'll come back to that. Tell us about, if people are unfamiliar, and I think a lot of people are unfamiliar, and they think, oh, Trump is trying to drain the swamp, or they're just an independent, they're not MAGA, but they think Democrats, Republicans, I can't tell them apart. Why do you think the Republican Party is so much worse? What's lying underneath that you saw and documented in this book?
Well, so, Cenk, there are two ways of looking at that in terms of why are they worse. I mean, I think you would agree with me, they're way worse on policy questions. For one thing, the Republican Party barely has any policy anymore. They decided not to have a platform last time. So now the policy is basically whatever Trump says it is. They used to be against tariffs. Now they love tariffs, which are going to send the country into a depression possibly, or war. So I think they're much worse in terms of policy. They don't believe in climate change. I mean, we could go through the list. I think your viewers all know what that is. What my book is about is that they lack integrity. They lack any moral core. They are all about swindling their own followers. I mean, they talk a lot about, they love to talk about owning the libs. That's their, one of their favorite slogans. And not clear what that means. It usually means something akin to a Twitter burn or a pathetic thing like that. But owning the libs, and what they really do is own their own people through a long series of scams, frauds, swindles, cons. And Trump is the epitome of all of that. One of the things that I try to show in the book is that the development of the Republican Party as a party of swindles and cons has led to the rise of Trump and the fact that Trump is acceptable to them, with many of them knowing exactly what he is. I mean, you look at someone like Marco Rubio, who in 2015 not only opposed him in the primary, but actually exposed him as a con man with Trump University. Marco Rubio and Ted Cruz made a huge deal out of Trump University and basically said the fact that Trump had swindled thousands of people out of a lot of money with a fake university that was supposed to teach them the secrets of real estate and how they could become rich, and basically gave them nothing, meant that he was disqualified as the Republican presidential nominee. We cannot nominate this crook and con man. And yet now, 8 years later, he wants to be the vice president to the crook and con man who he exposed. So, it's become a culture of impunity. And that is, I think, a big difference with the Democratic Party, because in the Democratic Party, nobody is rushing to defend Bob Menendez, who appears to be quite corrupt and possibly guilty of various serious crimes. It's kind of the opposite. The president, for whatever you think his faults are, and I would agree he has some, oversaw the prosecution of his own son and did not remove the prosecutor, as I think you and I both know Trump would have done if the tables were turned. So there's a huge difference in integrity between the two parties.
Yeah, but let's break it down further. Of course, I agree. I think their policies are disastrous, but that's easy for us to agree on since we're on the left, right? And then in terms of the grift, Donald Trump's a legendary con man. I think that he's surpassed P.T. Barnum as the greatest con man in American history, Trump University, Trump Charity, etc. But as you say, it's a culmination of the last 50 years. So I can break down for you
or even longer, really. But yeah.
Yeah. So I could break down for you what I think is wrong with the Democratic Party, and I think the number one issue for the part of the Democratic Party that's wrong is that they just follow whatever the donors tell them to. So that's easy to, in my opinion, to assess and to say, okay, that's the core of the problem on the Democratic side. The Republican side is a little bit more complicated. They've always served the rich and corporations, but then there's the religious right. There's a lot of folks in there with different agendas. So talk to us about those different agendas and who the different camps are.
Well, as you noted, there is definitely a sort of a dominant class of billionaires who are at the top and who are some of them are Trump's personal friends. Some of them are just, people who I guess Trump sucks up to and admires for their great wealth, which he pretends to have, but mostly has not had. So that's one sort of dominant force. And it's the reason why in every Republican administration, cutting taxes for the 1% or even a smaller group is the core policy. It is the top priority always and forever. Then there are, as you said, other factions. There's a strong faction that's existed on the religious right, at least since the days of Reagan, which I discussed in the book how that came about. And that came about in some degree as a grift as well, sponsored by Richard Viguerie, who went to Jerry Falwell and said we could raise a lot of money if we could only organize evangelical parishes into a political movement. And they did that and created the moral majority, and which later spawned various imitators like the Christian Coalition under Pat Robertson and so on. And their agenda is, so one of the things I talk about in the book is that originally their agenda was defending segregated Christian academies. It really had nothing to do with abortion. Excuse me. They try to pretend that abortion was the motivating force behind the Christian right, but actually when the religious right began in the mid-1970s, the Southern Baptist Convention had endorsed abortion rights, so in its own platform. So there's a myth there that deserves to be exploded, and a lot of it was about race and segregation for them. Falwell had his own segregated Christian academy, so that's another big force within the Republican Party, and overlapping with supposed religious concerns. Concerns about morality, supposedly, although with Trump, it's hard to give much credit to that anymore. And race, as you know, is a major motivating factor for the right in this country, and always has been. And there are other factions as well. I mean, there's now sort of a tech faction led by people like Peter Thiel, who want as little government as possible. They almost like to have, their own sovereignty, and escape any government regulation of the tech industry, which really kind of, in my view, needs a lot more regulation than it has gotten, especially with AI developing and the rest. So these are all sort of factions within the modern Republican Party, but what they all do is grift. They all have their own forms of grift, and it has, appeared in different forms in the religious right, in what's called the prosperity gospel, in the Tea Party, which was full of grifters, that movement competing with each other and fighting, which is a kind of a funny part of the book. And I examine all of these grifts and scams in the book and try to explain how they come together and how Trump represents kind of an amazing sort of apotheosis of this tendency on the right, which has only become stronger and stronger since the 1950s, when it took the form of anti-communism and paranoia about an imminent communist takeover of the United States. And the only way you could stop that was to send money to these various anti-communist advocates and organizations.
Yeah. So, Joe, I want to take one part of that faction, the Christian nationalists. So here's my question about them. Is it that they, I'm not talking about the flock, because the flock is always misled, right? I'm talking about their leaders. Is it that they think, yeah, this is obviously so the rich can get tax cuts, so we'll trick our own followers into pretending that it's about religion when we don't care about that at all, right? Or is it that they're doing that same trick, but they don't care about the rich overall? They're not part of the Chamber of Commerce, Republicans, etc. They're just worried about their own grift. They think, oh, if I get people riled up, yeah, they'll vote Republican, but they'll also give money to my church, and that's what I mainly care about.
Well, the interesting thing about that, Cenk, is that in my book, I describe how these prosperity gospel preachers many of whom have become millionaires or multimillionaires, some of whom are very close to Trump, like Paula White and Kenneth Copeland, they don't get taxed. I mean, they really have it sweet. They have it set up so that as supposed religious institutions, their businesses don't get taxed. So I don't know if they are worried about the tax cuts that other wealthy malefactors are, pursuing. But I do think they see their interests as aligned because they too want to avoid government regulation. At one point, as I describe in the book, Senator Pressler actually became so appalled by the depredations of these prosperity gospel preachers that he opened an investigation in the Senate. And of course, they moved very quickly to get that shut down and stopped. And they escaped any kind of sanction or real investigation. They just refused to cooperate. And of course, Pressler, being himself, he folded and went away, and that was the end of that. They see themselves as a constituency of the Republican Party, and they're very much aligned with right-wing ideology. Yeah,
Joe, you have as a subtitle in your book, "Hijacked American Conservatism," but is that
I knew you were going to argue with that, Cenk.
Yeah, is that a thing? Is that real, or is that just a mirage? Was there ever American conservatism?
I think there was. I mean, I think someone like John McCain was a genuine conservative. He went through periods when he was less genuine, perhaps, but I think he was a real conservative. I think the guy who wrote the foreword to my book, George Conway, who was somebody who I opposed, quite vehemently in the past, and exposed some of his activities in the New York Observer when I worked there. Now, as somebody I consider a friend, I think he's a real honest conservative. I think, Liz Cheney is a real conservative, which is why they'd like to execute her on TV now. I mean, this is the real conservatism. At one time, provided a kind of guardrail in our society against possible excesses of liberalism, and maybe some people may think there's no such thing as an excess. I don't think there was a huge amount of excess, but it's good to have a debate over how to run a society and what you do for people and what you ask of people in return. That's a worthwhile philosophical debate, but we don't have it anymore because there's no organized institution of real conservatives anymore.
Yeah.
That was the Republican Party, but you're absolutely right that if it ever did exist, it does not exist now.
Yeah, I don't think it ever existed. I think that is there such a thing as a conservative? Of course, being against change to some degree. It takes a lot of different versions of that. But being anti-immigration is a form of resisting change. Overregulation, etc. Some of that stuff is legitimate. Some of it we would argue with. So you could say, well, that sounds right, but I don't think the Republicans ever meant any of that. I mean, including John McCain. If you told me what are the two things John McCain cares most about, I would say starting wars and getting tax cuts for the rich. So, and that's not really a conservative position.
But I don't know that's. I mean, I don't want to turn this into a debate about John McCain, Cenk. But he did when they tried to overthrow the Affordable Care Act. He voted on the side of, in my view, on the side of the American people against the rich who are trying to do away with that. So, on at least some issues, he showed an independence of that of the oligarchs that I think reflected, in fact, a conservative. I want to say a conservative temperament, where they put this in, and it was serving people, and he wasn't going to overturn it for the sake of the rich who wanted to do that.
Or he hated Trump.
Well, there was that didn't hurt.
Yeah, so
I'm sure that didn't hurt.
That's right. You're right. We shouldn't get into a debate about McCain. So let me turn to the final thought here. Okay, so you read your book and you see it's like it's a horror show, right? The Republican Party when you lift a veil and you see.
I tried to put some jokes in. I mean,
I hear you. But I'm just saying, like, you see all these grifters, right, from religious leaders ripping off religious followers, so-called conservatives ripping off actual conservative voters, etc. But yet the Democrats can't seem to expose them, and they keep losing to hucksters, like obvious hucksters, like Donald Trump. They lost in 2016. They're about to lose in 2024. So as I look at it, I go, what the hell's wrong with the Democratic Party? Why can't they beat this when it's so obvious?
Well, I mean, did they lose in 2016? She won the popular vote by quite a bit, Hillary Clinton. So they didn't. If we had a better electoral system, they wouldn't lose to someone like Trump, I think, almost ever. Biden beat him by a lot in 2020. So I don't think you could say they just keep losing all the time. I do think, I agree with you, that it would do them a lot of good to read this book and take a hard look at how corrupt the Republican and conservative movements are, Republican Party and the conservative movement, and how they've ripped off their own people, and try to, let people know about that. Force the right to defend the ripoffs that it's perpetrated on its own people. That, I think, would be a useful exercise for them, and it would show a certain toughness that is very much needed. I think we agree.
Yeah, so I'm of course a lot tougher on the Democratic Party than, well, first of all, than almost anyone on the left. But look, here's my theory on why they don't expose the corruption of the Republican Party, which is overwhelming. It's because they're also corrupt. They're corrupt in a different way, but they take donor money and do exactly what the donors tell them to do. So that's why they don't talk about the Republican corruption and give up their largest political advantage that they would have if they brought that up. What do you think of that?
Well, I would say, first of all, I think that not all Democrats are the same, and so I think there would be some Democrats that would fit your description, and many others who wouldn't. But if I write about a book about the Democratic Party, maybe I would find that there was, some of what you're talking about. I've certainly exposed Democrats in the past. When I started working at the Village Voice years ago in New York City, it's a Democratic city, and the corrupt people that you found were Democrats. Also, a lot of the good people, because there basically weren't any Republicans. But I don't think they're the same. I think what I if you go through the book, and it sounds to me like you've read quite a bit of it, I think I would challenge you to make any comparable, find any comparable things that Democrats or people on the left have done to these ripoffs, which are so rampant on the right. There's just nothing like it on the left. You know, there's a reason why, for instance, that the small dollar donors and the Republican Party give to a thing called WinRed. And WinRed is a private profit-making company. And you know, as you know very well, on the other side, on the left side, those who want to give to Democratic candidates give through Act Blue, small donors, which is a nonprofit and doesn't rip off people in any way. There's never been a scandal attached to it. And WinRed is jacking up prices that even the Republicans say, you know, what are we doing here? And this has happened over and over again, Cenk. In my book, most of the people that I quote about the corruption of the Republicans are other Republicans who have looked at this. People like Jim Garrity at the National Review and Eric Erickson at Red State, many others who've looked across this landscape of looting by so-called conservatives, and they're disgusted by it. And there's a reason for that.
Yeah. So look, the Republican Party is definitely worse, in my opinion. Their policies are terrible. All they are is hate and give money to the rich.
They're much more crooked too. You can admit that.
No, no. Of course, I'm going to get to that. Now, on a personal level, their personal corruption is way worse. Donald Trump is just trying to find every way to make money from the presidency and from this.
Well, he's participated. I go through in the book how he's done every one of these scams himself. I mean, I go through a long litany of these various types of scams, and he's done all of them in the last 20 years because he's out for a buck all the time and very eager to rip off his own people.
Yeah, I mean, there's hundreds of examples of Trump and people around Trump. Jared Kushner taking $2 billion from Saudi Arabia right after he helped Mohammed bin Salman cover up all the horrible things that he did, including dismembering a reporter. There's Steve Bannon lying to his own audience and pretending to build a wall he didn't build, etc. So their personal corruption is definitely worse.
He may even go to jail for that, even though Trump pardoned him.
Yeah, in New York, he might.
If you read the book, you'll see what the evidence is against Bannon in that case, and it's overwhelming.
Right, and they've got the Christian nationalists who I loathe. And I know a lot of people are touchy, oh, they're religious, we shouldn't say it. No, I loathe them. They're fundamentalist nut jobs. So I'm very clear on the problems of the right. But Joe, when you talk about normal congressmen or senators, 99% of the Republicans and about 85% of the Democrats, if I'm being generous to the Democrats, have the most standard corruption of all time, systemic corruption. They take money from big drug companies, big oil companies, big banks, and they do exactly as they're ordered. So there's not, when you break it down to Congress, there isn't much of a difference.
If that were, yes, but if that were literally true, then for instance, we would not have a president who has decided to make the drug companies negotiate with Medicare over their prices.
Joe,
force them to lower the price of insulin. Well, that is what's happening.
Joe, look. See, that's the difference between us, and that's okay, and it's a good conversation. But he lowered the price of one drug. That's a cover story for not lowering the price of 9,999 other drugs.
No, that's
if I'm the drug companies, I love what Joe Biden did. You took all the pressure and all the heat off of us and pretended that you're negotiating drug prices when you're going to negotiate, what, 10 by the time you get to 2026? 1 right now, and you're going to leave tens of thousands of other drugs to let us set any price we want while you tricked people into thinking we solved the issue? I think that's in some ways worse than what the Republicans are doing.
I don't think he's claimed to solve the issue. First of all,
I think all the time, Joe.
What he's actually done.
He brags about it all the time as if he totally solved it, including in the debate.
He shouldn't say that if he did, but I think what he did exposes the fact that drug prices are way too high and that the government can and should do something about it. And then it's great, I think, for people like you and maybe me. I don't write about that a lot, but people on the ground, activists and just rank and file party members to say, hey, we need to go a lot further. Yes, but that is certainly the beginning. And of course, the Republicans, Cenk, opposed even that, right?
Of course.
They don't want any drug prices to be lowered or the government to play any role So that to me, again, is a big difference. And shows that, to whatever extent lobbies have influence, and I agree they have influence, way too much influence in both parties, you will get further with Democrats than you will on the other side.
All right. Everybody, the book is called The Longest Con: How Grifters, Swindlers, and Frauds Hijacked American Conservatism. If you don't know the story of how they are ripping off their own voters, their own constituents, their own people, and how they're con men, you should definitely read the book because it's definitely got all that information in a way that's absolutely backed up. So, Joe, thank you so much for joining us on Young Turks. We appreciate it.
It was a pleasure. It's a pleasure to see you. It's a pleasure to argue with you, and I enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
All right, thanks, Joe. Take care.